This is the Hiking Through Life podcast. We've all been gifted a journey called life. Let's see where the journey leads us today. Welcome to the Hiking Through Life podcast, where we talk with people who in some way, shape, or form have been influenced by the outdoors. I'm Andy, the producer of this podcast, and my lovely wife Sarah will be your host. Together, we make up Hiking Through Life.
This podcast is all about bringing all kinds of people who are inspired by the outdoors and sharing their stories.
We hope that by sharing people's stories, it inspires others to get out and live a more meaningful life. Tune in every week for new episodes, or better yet, subscribe to the Hiking Through Life podcast on your favorite podcast provider. If you enjoy this podcast, please share it with others. Also, if you have a story to share or know of anyone who might be interested in being a guest on this podcast, head on over to hikingthroughlife.net/podcast and get in touch with us.
If you'd like to support Hiking Through Life, you can go to hikingthroughlife.net/shop. We have t-shirts, water bottles, and we recently added stickers to the shop.
Use the code podcast at checkout and receive 10% off your first order. There are other ways you can support this podcast as well. You can check those out at hikingthroughlife.net/support. Also, be sure to sign up for our email list. You can do that by heading over to hikingthroughlife.net. Enter your email address and click subscribe. There's no commitment. You can unsubscribe at any time. As part of our email list, you'll receive our monthly newsletter. We'll also be sending out any promotional codes for Hiking Through Life gear. It's an excellent way to follow Hiking Through Life's journey. Now sit back and enjoy this week's episode.
Welcome to the Hiking Through Life podcast. Today we have Dave Freeman on the podcast with us. He is half of the Freeman Explore team. Perhaps you have heard of the Freemans, who lived a year in Minnesota's Boundary Waters Canoe area wilderness in order to educate and spread awareness for the campaign to save the Boundary Waters. In addition to living a year in the Boundary Waters, they have been exploring wild places all over the world since 2001, including the Arctic, paddling to DC, and kayaking from Seattle to Alaska. The Freemans also run a wilderness classroom and educate kids on all of these wild places. Welcome to the podcast, Dave.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, for sure. We're really happy to have you on. So can you tell us, how did this adventurous lifestyle come to be? It sounds like you and Amy both grew up going to the Boundary Waters.
We did. We both grew up in cities. I grew up in a suburb of Chicago, and Amy grew up in St. Paul, so pretty urban areas. But as kids, our parents brought us up to the Boundary Waters, and I think we both sort of fell in love with wild places through the Boundary Waters, and we both ended up sort of gravitating to northeastern Minnesota, and had jobs up there, moved up there, and then we met in the Boundary Waters, I guess about 15 years ago now, and the rest is history.
So did you guys meet, because you guys also guide trips up there, did you meet while you were guiding trips?
Yes. Yeah, we met in Grand Marais on Lake Superior, and I was guiding canoe trips at the time, and Amy was guiding sea kayaking trips on Lake Superior, and we met in town. And Amy had always wanted to kayak around Lake Superior, and I sort of convinced her that she should do it with somebody else and not do it solo. And then after a little bit, I decided I should convince her that I was the person to do it with her. So spent 2 months doing that, and sort of been inseparable ever since.
So that was your kind of first big expedition, like kind of not even a first date or honeymoon, but just go and kayak Lake Superior.
Yeah, well, we started dating a few months before, so it wasn't like we just did it when we didn't know each other at all. But it was definitely the first sort of extended journey that we went on. We did like a 1 or 2 night camping trip as a shakedown beforehand, but it was pretty new for both of us.
Wow. And so, I mean, both of you clearly have like a huge, outdoor background growing up and everything. So was it around that time when you were like going on Lake Superior that you guys were kind of realizing that this expedition style lifestyle was what you guys were meant to do?
Yeah, I think so. I had started a few years earlier and had already done some other expeditions before I met Amy, um, but once we joined forces, things started to grow from there, and we paddled 3,000 miles across South America through the Amazon, and then we did a 12,000-mile trip by canoe, kayak, and dog sled across North America, and so our journeys sort of got larger and more complex, and we started having more and more school kids follow us through the wilderness classroom, and so things just started growing.
Yeah, and so the wilderness classroom was that something that you had already created prior to all of your other expeditions, or it sounds like that was created in 2001 from what I was reading?
Yeah, so I started it with another man named Eric Frost, who also lives in northeastern Minnesota, and he had an education background. He had been a classroom teacher, and basically we were just looking for a way to be able to virtually bring kids to wild places, because we thought, you can't put a classroom of third graders on a airplane and fly them to the Amazon, but we could use technology to sort of bring them there and use online polls and different interactive features so that they could actually help us make decisions and sort of learn along with us. And so that started in 2001 and slowly grew over time. By 2015, we had about 100,000 kids and 3,200 teachers or something like that following our journeys. And then we sort of took a break from the wilderness classroom and focused a lot of our attention on working to protect the boundary waters, because there's a copper mine that's being proposed there. So our focus sort of shifted a little bit away from the wilderness classroom and working with kids, and more working with advocating for the protection of the boundary waters, which is a place that sort of means more to us than any place that we've explored. But now with COVID, we're finding that those skills that we learned is very relevant and needed right now. So we're doing virtual school assemblies where basically we like beam ourselves into either into a school or directly to kids that are learning from home, and we can teach them about the Amazon or dog sledding or all these different expeditions that we've been on. Instead of going into their gymnasium and doing a program physically in their school, we can do it remotely. So that's been really fun and sort of a way to try and help during this challenging time.
Yeah, well, because even before COVID, it seems like you guys were doing some of the lessons virtually, but you were also going to a lot of places.
Yeah. We started offering basically virtual school assemblies using Skype back in 2013. And I think it was just a little ahead of our time. I mean, we've done quite a few of them over the years, but most schools were just like, what? Like, what are you talking about? We're gonna use Skype to learn about the rainforest? Like, they didn't quite understand it. And now, starting in last spring when kids were working remotely, we just started getting bombarded with schools like, hey, what's this virtual assembly thing? Like, we want to do this. So it's been fun to take something that we had, started developing a long time ago and done quite a few of, but it's really taken off in the last few months.
Right. I mean, it's totally the time for it to be doing. And like going into the school year this year, I'm sure loads of classrooms and teachers are going to want to be reaching out to you guys as well, especially with people not being able to travel right now. I mean, you basically bring that experience to life for children.
Yeah, it's really fun, and it's cool because we can work with schools all over. I think it was 2 nights ago we worked with 300 kids in India, 13 to 16-year-olds, and it was 9:30 at night here in Minnesota, and it was 8 o'clock in the morning the next day, I think, in India. So it's sort of fun to be able to sort of not worry about distance and be able to sort of connect with people all over.
Yeah, I mean, the possibilities become endless. That's so cool. India. I mean, how did they even get in contact with you guys?
If you do a search for virtual school assembly, our page is, in the top 3 or something. And so they just found us and sort of reached out. And so, yeah, it was sort of a fun connection. We've done that in the past through Skype. Skype has a program called Skype in the Classroom, which is sort of cool, that it connects teachers from all over the world with experts and different people. And so that's another thing we've done, where we've connected with schools in the UK and India and China and all over the place.
And is your goal with the Wilderness Classroom, it's mainly elementary, correct?
It is mostly, mostly K through 8 that we're working with.
And it seems like there's like a large variety of things that educators can choose on that website, the Wilderness Classroom website. Like, it looks like you have assemblies focused on the rainforest, dog sledding, North American assemblies. Is there any that you're like focusing in on during this time, or is it just kind of whatever the schools would like?
It's whatever the schools would like. Our rainforest assembly is our most popular with elementary school students, and the dog sledding assemblies are really cool. Those are popular too. But some schools are studying oceans, or they're looking for something specific about the boundary waters. So we do something about the year we spent in the wilderness. So we adapt them to whatever they're interested in. But our rainforest program and the dog sledding, those are sort of our bread and butter.
Okay, yeah, because you guys also, in the winter, you guys are doing dog sledding, correct? When you're not adventuring.
Yeah. When we're not off someplace else, we typically guide dog sled trips for Wintergreen Dog Sled Lodge, which is right outside of Ely. And so they have a kennel of 70 sled dogs. And so, yeah, it's really fun. We're out all day, most days out in the winter woods with folks showing them how to have fun in the snow and the cold. And so then when we do the virtual assemblies, we can, we'll grab one or two of our favorite well-mannered sled dogs, and we'll use them for examples as we're showing the students, the dog sled and the clothes we wear, and how we harness the dogs and how we care for the dogs, and answer all their questions. So it's really fun.
Yeah, I mean, that's the most real you can get, other than actually being in person with them, for them to actually see a sled dog. Because otherwise, I mean, especially kids in India, like, they probably wouldn't otherwise have ever seen a sled dog. So that's really, really cool.
Or perhaps even snow. So
Right. Or snow even. So, I mean, the opportunities are really endless out there. It's pretty cool what we can do with technology. And it's so like ironic that you guys go on these like vast wilderness trips, but are so reliant on technology when you're going out there. Have you ever thought about how strange that is?
yeah, it is. It is strange. But we've just sort of adapted to it. And I guess we really see on our expeditions, part of it is sort of a selfish thing, right? We just love being out there. We love the physical challenge. We love the sort of the stillness and the solitude. But I don't think that we would do these year-long or multi-year long projects if there wasn't some sort of higher purpose, something we were working towards, whether it's working with the campaign to save the boundary waters to help protect our nation's most popular wilderness, or being in constant communication with school children and helping them understand why wilderness is important, and teaching them about the plants and animals and people that we're encountering. That's a big part of what we're doing and why we're out there. And so technology is just sort of it's a part of it. It's an important part of it that helps us. But we sort of look at it, just like it's like a tent, or like a canoe, or like a pair of cross-country skis. It's just, the satellite terminal is just it's another piece of equipment, just like our stove, and we use it for a very specific thing, and then it gets put away in our pack, and we don't worry about it until the next day when we need to use it for 20 minutes to, to send out information or download emails or whatever it is.
Right. It's just, I mean, the luxuries that we have in this day and age is pretty incredible that you can do that. So when you guys were out for your whole year in the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness, were you tied to the wilderness classroom at that time as well?
We were, yep. We hired someone part-time to help us make worksheets and sort of enhance educational materials. And then we were sending out weekly sort of blog posts that would then have worksheets tied to them. And we were doing sort of daily small social media posts with daily data that kids could graph. We were actively working with kids during the year in the wilderness. But that was a little bit on the back burner. The reason that we were out there was to help people understand that the Boundary Waters is an extremely special place, and there's this Chilean mining company that wants to build a copper mine right on the edge of the wilderness that would, have very, very negative impacts on the area, pollute the water, and so that was sort of the main focus of the year. But we were working with school children as well.
And as far as the Save the Boundary Waters campaign goes, I mean, I know you guys went out there and that was 2015 that you did the year in the wilderness, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So, I mean, there's probably been huge growth in the campaign since then. I mean, and for anybody who doesn't know much about the campaign, how would you describe it in a very simple way for people who are unaware of what this is?
Yeah, so the campaign to save the Boundary Waters was started to help protect the Boundary Waters from copper mining. We've never had a copper mine in Minnesota, and copper mines have a very long track record of causing significant water pollution, both surface and groundwater pollution. There's small amounts of sulfide in the rock, along with small amounts of copper and other minerals that we want. And when sulfide is exposed to air and water, it produces battery acid, sulfuric acid. And every mine of this type that has been built anywhere in the world has caused significant ground or surface water pollution. So putting this type of mine right on the edge of the wilderness, where any water pollution from the mine would flow directly into the wilderness, is just not a good idea. And so the campaign to save the Boundary Waters, their website is savetheboundarywaters.org, has been working to stop mines from being built and to permanently protect the watershed, to basically make it so that copper mines are not allowed within the watershed of the Boundary Waters. And it's a growing organization. They have, along with their partner organizations, they represent over 18 million people from all across the country. They're actively working to protect this place, and so it's a great organization. I encourage people to learn more about it and look for ways you could get involved.
Yeah, there's one super cool way that people can get involved. I know that they do like Boundary Waters yoga on Zoom weekly. Well, it's not weekly, but it's every few weeks, and you just pay a small donation and then you get a yoga class, but you're donating to this awesome cause of Save the Boundary Waters.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, I've participated in a few of those ones. It's really neat. So what are some of the biggest changes in growth you've seen in the Save the Boundary Waters campaign in the 5 years you guys have so closely been working with them?
When Amy and I first learned about the Twin Metals mine being proposed, Northeastern Minnesotans for Wilderness, which is a local nonprofit organization based in Ely, it was volunteer run, had, a few hundred members, and from mostly just local people living in northeastern Minnesota. But some of those folks realized that this was a big deal, and if a mine was built in this place, it would forever change the landscape and have detrimental effects on our local economy. And now over time, the campaign has grown. They have full-time staff members that are in Ely, as well as Duluth and the Twin Cities, and they're out in Washington, D.C., meeting with elected officials, bringing business owners and people like Amy and myself out to Washington, D.C. to tell our stories and help make us understand why building a mine next to the boundary waters doesn't make sense. They've really become a force to reckon with. And, when you're trying to stop a multi-billion-dollar mining company from building a mine, you got to be all in, and you got to have a lot of resources. And the campaign to save the boundary waters has grown and made the connections that they need to put up a very good challenge to these mining companies and stop this from happening, which is really important.
Right. And the whole stopping this from happening, I mean, at what point is it going to end? I mean, is there a foreseeable future of them either deciding to do it or just not doing it? Or is this just an ever-going battle, you think?
In 2014, Amy and I, we paddled from Ely to Washington, D.C., and thousands of people signed it, and we delivered it to the head of the Forest Service. Well, there's 3 signed canoes now.
Okay.
There's a few of them, but that was the first one.
I know I signed the one that was at Midwest Mountaineering.
Yeah, there's a few, and we sort of thought like, great, we did this. All thousands and thousands of people, spoke out, and we're like, great, President Obama was the president at the time. We're like, all right, he's just going to like wave a magic wand and this is all going to go away. But what we learned is that these things take a long time. Oftentimes it's a decade to really get something like this done. And so it's going to take a few more years. And I think the reality is it's going to take a new administration. But in the end, the Boundary Waters is our nation's most popular wilderness area. It is central to the economy of northeastern Minnesota, and it's just too precious to risk. And I think people understand that, voters understand that. And so in the end, we will protect the Boundary Waters, but it's going to take more time.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely what it sounds like, time. If people have been there, I think that's like the biggest way to make a connection with it and realize why that place is so special. And so for you guys to spend a whole year there, I can't even imagine what that was like. I mean, even coming back into society after a year, that must have been so weird too.
It was. It took us several weeks to really be able to sleep. And we were on an airplane a couple days after we got out of the wilderness, and flew to DC for a week of meetings, and it was quite surreal to leave the wilderness and all sort of the tranquility and the silence, and just all of a sudden be in a city, with the air pollution and the noise and just sort of as far from a wild, untrammeled place as you could be. It was very shocking. It was definitely like culture shock.
Because you guys truly didn't leave it. You had people coming in and bringing you resupplies, correct?
Yeah. So we were working very closely with the campaign to save the Boundary Waters, and so our expedition manager Levi, he organized over 300 volunteers that approximately every 2 weeks. Groups of people would come in and bring us supplies, and if it was getting colder, they'd bring us in warmer clothes. If it was getting warmer, they would, take out our warmer clothes and bring in, a lighter weight sleeping bag or whatever we needed. So yeah, we didn't cross the road. We didn't go in a building. We didn't flip a light switch. We didn't leave the wilderness for 366 days. We got an extra day because it happened to be a leap year that year.
Oh, one extra day in there. That's wild. And because, I mean, you guys had a lot of kind of mental training leading up to this, because you had been in the Arctic before that. You did your kayaking on Lake Superior. You were in South America. So you had a handful of other excursions to mentally prepare you for this. But this was still the longest drawn out one, correct?
Well, the one that we did previous to that was 3 years long.
Was that the Arctic?
Yeah, we went from Seattle up to the Arctic Ocean, and then from there, sort of on a diagonal back to Lake Superior, and then from there out the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence Seaway and down the East Coast to Key West, Florida. So that was 12,000 miles and took us 3 years. But, we went through towns and, we took breaks. And so it was broken up. But, the sort of physical challenges of that were definitely more than what we experienced during a year in the wilderness. The skills that we had developed over the previous decade made a year in the wilderness possible, I guess. And it wasn't that there were never challenges, but we definitely were prepared and had everything we needed. And we didn't want to leave. We would have been happy to stay out there. We really felt like we had everything we need. We had clean water we could drink right out of the lakes. We had food that people brought into us. We had a shelter, just a simple tent was all we felt like we needed, and we had we had each other, and we had this very strong sense of purpose because we were working to protect this national treasure that's our favorite place on earth. So with those things, we really were content and would have been happy to stay longer.
You would have stayed longer, but you had a flight to DC, correct?
Yeah, we could have stayed, but
yeah,
we couldn't have stayed. In order for us to try and accomplish our goal of protecting the boundary waters, we had to leave. We there was a whole nother chapter of the story. As soon as we left, we were in DC for a week for meetings, and then the next month we had presentations and events almost daily, and then we spent 8 months writing a book. And it was like we could have stayed, but to really try and fulfill our purpose for being out there, staying was not the right choice. We needed to leave the wilderness. We'd already experienced it, and we needed to share it in new ways. And unfortunately, selfishly, maybe that meant we had to go out so we could go to TV studios and conference centers and libraries and microbreweries and churches and Congress, right? We had to go and be heard by anyone that would listen.
Right, absolutely. It's like you experience something so intense for a whole year that, sharing the story is the only way to move on with what your guys' mission was. So speaking of challenges, what were some of the biggest challenges you did face while out there? I can imagine there was some weather challenges, especially in the winter seasons.
Yeah, the biggest challenge actually was a lack of cold. In the boundary waters, it gets quite cold. It was a very mild winter, and we had expected the lakes to be frozen and to have the sled dogs we would use for the winter and our first resupply after freeze up brought in around the 11th of December. But our sled dogs didn't end up coming in until the 2nd of January. The freeze up was very, very late, and we almost ran out of food. And then even once everything froze up, it was very mild. We had a couple nights where it got down to like 30 below zero, but for the most part, it was warmer than average. And so what happens is when you have ice form and then snow falls on the ice, and then the weight of the snow sort of pushes down on the ice, and then water seeps up through cracks, and it's insulated by the snow. So you get, a few inches of snow, and then you get a few inches of water, and then you get the ice. And so when you go trudging through the snow and you hit one of these pockets of water that's pooled on top of the ice, you expose it to the air, and the water basically freezes instantly to, your boots or your sled or your skis or the dog. It was just a very bad year for slush. I think in large part because of sort of the milder than normal winter. And so it made travel really difficult. There were some days where just traveling a couple miles was like, was many multi-hour affair. So that was one of the more challenging parts. And then also just staying warm in the winter, like everything takes longer. We spent probably at least an hour every day just gathering and processing firewood. And moving camp took several hours just to break down and set up camp. So the winter it can be a challenging time, but it's also just a really nice time to be out there. It's real quiet, and there's hardly anybody else out there, and you can see all sorts of animal tracks. So moose and otter and wolves and ravens and all sorts of animals leave tracks in the snow, and you can sort of piece together what all the animals are doing by the evidence they leave.
Yeah, I've never been up there in the winter, but I've heard it's a really magical time to be up there. So would you say winter is your preference over being up there in other months?
Well, it's hard to choose a favorite month. I think September, or because it's just September, that there really aren't any bugs, and by the end of the month, the leaves are starting to change, crisp, like fog-covered lakes in the morning, and then in March the days are really long and it's getting warmer, and you get sort of a freeze-thaw cycle at the end of the month and into the beginning of April, where the snow melts and then freezes, and so you can ski across the lakes without sinking down in the snow, and it's just this crust on the top, and you can just fly, and you can just go all over the place. It's really amazing. Sometimes it lasts for a few days, sometimes for a few weeks, but it's like a really magical time to be out there.
Yeah, that sounds really, really neat. A whole year. That's crazy. That's amazing that you guys did that. What do you think was the biggest impact, like the biggest takeaway you guys had from your whole year that you want to share with others? And I mean, I know you wrote a whole book about it, but just in a brief synopsis, like what was the biggest takeaway?
I think just personally, just sort of the importance of slowing down and just really thinking about what's important. A lot of times I think we get caught up on a lot of stuff that maybe doesn't matter quite as much as just surrounding ourselves with the people we care about, and putting our energy towards things that we really believe in, and just sort of the benefits of simplicity, I guess.
Yeah, simplicity. That's totally something that I love taking away from 3-day backpacking trips or 4-day canoe trips. But I mean, yeah, that's all. I mean, you don't need to go a whole year. It'd be amazing to go a whole year. But yeah, the simplicity thing, it's very true. We need very few things to live. And you guys definitely showed that, like by being there a whole year. You didn't turn outlets, you didn't drive, you didn't do any of that, and you survived.
Yeah, we thrived. It was one of the best years of our lives. I mean, it really was. And you're right, you don't need to spend a whole year out there. An afternoon or a few days or a week, just taking that time to be out in nature and slow down, and is so important, physically and mentally, to just take the time to do that.
Yeah, 100%. So what advice do you have for people who have never visited the Boundary Waters? Like, what would you say to a first timer going up there?
Well, the Boundary Waters is it's a really special place. And one of the things that makes it so cool is that it's very accessible. During our year in the wilderness, our youngest visitor was 2 months old, and our oldest visitor was in their 80s.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and so it's a great place for people of all ages, and even different physical abilities, because it's not like you have to load everything in a super heavy backpack and lug everything around. When you're first starting out, you can start small. There are places where you put your canoe in, and you could paddle a mile or so across the lake, and you could find a campsite, and you could set up camp there. Or if you want, you could portage in deep into the wilderness. There over 800 named lakes in the wilderness and over 2,000 campsites. So if you want to go far, you can, but there are also opportunities to visit the boundary waters for the day or camp overnight, but stay close to the trailhead, close to the edge, as you build your skills and confidence. And there's also a whole network of outfitters that their whole job is to help people by providing the equipment that they need, helping them choose a route, helping them reserve a permit. They'll even pack food for you. So you can show up with just, your personal clothes, and they'll give you your food and your tent and your sleeping bags and packs and canoes, everything that you need. Or if you already have, camping equipment, you could pack your food, you could bring your equipment, and you could just rent a canoe from them, and they can still, go over maps with you and show you where the good campsites are, and help you sort of learn and have a successful trip. So I would definitely suggest, connecting with an outfitter. There are also guides. I work as a guide in the summer leading canoe trips. So if you feel like you're not ready to go out on your own, then you could look at hiring someone to go with you, and they could teach you how to do it.
Yeah, I love that you said it's like accessible to people of all ages, because there's so many different sites that you can go to. Like you said, you could easily just paddle across a lake and there's a campsite not far at all from an outfitter.
Yep.
So yeah, it's definitely an accessible place for people. Do you feel like you guys got to all of the 800 lakes and 2,000 campsites in your year?
No, we set a goal of visiting at least 500 different bodies of water, and I think we went to 502. So there were still over 300 that we didn't have the time or energy to visit, even in an entire year. So it's a vast place. Still lots to explore. There's still quite a few lakes we haven't been to.
Wow. Yeah. After a year and you didn't touch them all. Because was there like a handful of days where you guys would have like lots of rest days? Because you weren't on like a rigid schedule, correct?
No, we weren't. We camped in about 100 different locations. Like we moved camp about 100 times. So in the winter, we were moving less often, like, on average, 1.5 or 2 times a week, something like that. In the summer, we were moving a little bit more often. And then as the lakes were freezing in the fall and thawing in the spring, we did not move. In the fall, we had about 5 weeks as the lakes were freezing, where we only moved campsites a couple times, maybe 3 different campsites over the course of 5 weeks, or 4 campsites or something, because freezing process was really slow. So there was just a lot of time when the lakes were sort of too thin, the ice was too thin to walk across, but it was sort of too thick to paddle through. And so we would sort of get stuck for a while waiting, and then things would change a little bit and we could get across one lake, and then we get to the next lake and it was sort of too thin to walk across again, and we just have to wait a little longer. So it was, in the summer, we were, probably moving campsite every other day or something like that.
Okay, yeah, that would make sense that the waiting came in the winter. Did those days waiting in the winter ever feel like they dragged out, or did you guys seem to always find things that needed to be done?
Well, I think by that time, we had already been in the wilderness for quite a while. We entered on the 23rd of September. So, by late November, early December, as it was, things were really starting to freeze, we had really sort of fallen into a rhythm. And there were parts of it that was sort of like, okay, we're ready. Like, why isn't it freezing? Mostly because we were sort of worried about running out of food. But we never really thought about like, like we were windbound or stormbound or anything like that. It was more, if the weather wasn't good, we just did other things, but it didn't feel like we were trapped. It was just sort of like, why would you try to go someplace if there's a 20-mile-an-hour headwind? You just wait wait, we'll go the next day, like we weren't on a schedule. So we never really felt like, we never felt constrained by things like that, I guess.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's where so many people get in trouble when they are up in the boundary waters, because they perhaps are unfortunately on a schedule. But that's a really neat perspective that you guys didn't, you were so open to time and it wasn't a constraint.
Yeah, that was definitely one of the luxuries of being out for so long is time took on a different perspective.
Yeah. But so it sounds like you guys, like when the resupplies came, you guys always had visitors as well. So would people come and like stay, like camp with you for a couple nights?
Sometimes. So we set the resupplies up basically every 2 weeks, except during the freeze up and the thaw. Then they were like 6 weeks apart. But we set all the dates up before we entered the wilderness and location. So there are 63 different entry points for the boundary waters, like scattered all over. And so we chose entry points scattered all over the wilderness. And so, it was like July 13th, we're going to be by the Sawbill Lake entry point, right? So people could sign up that they would come in from there. And we sort of committed we'll be within, a couple hour paddle of that entry point. And sometimes they spent the night. Sometimes they spent a few days with us, but a lot of times they were either just starting a canoe trip. So they just scheduled their, 5-day canoe trip so that they would enter with a pack of food for us, and they'd come and drop it off on our campsite and visit with us for an hour or two. And then they would be off, on their own canoe trip. So, but it really varied. And we there was so much interest in bringing in supplies that actually multiple groups would come in, because you can't have more than 9 people in one place in the wilderness. So, sometimes a group of 5 people would come in and they drop off supplies and, visit with us for an hour or two, and then they'd go off on their canoe trip. And then a few hours later, another group would come in and visit with us for a little bit. And so some people we visited with for an hour or two, other people would spend the night. Some were, close friends and family members, and others were people that we'd never met before, but just loved the boundary waters and wanted to support what we're doing. And so it was really neat. We met a lot of great people, and the resupplies was something we always looked forward to. And we savored those conversations with people long after they left, because there was those pretty limited contact with people for the year.
Right. I can imagine having those people come out was just kind of like a very uplifting moment to just have some sort of more human connection other than the two of you.
Yeah. And just a very concrete reminder of sort of why we were out there, these other people that really cared about the boundary waters and saw value in what we were doing out there, sort of bearing witness to the wilderness and helping the campaign to save the boundary waters. So, we knew that through, reading newspaper articles or messages people would send us or whatever, but physically, seeing smiling faces and talking to people was really a wonderful thing, something that we really cherished.
Yeah. I mean, I think I saw the picture of you guys the day that you set out on the year-long trip, and there was 200 or 300 people there supporting what you were doing and just sending you off on your trip. So there was so much support, and still is so much support for the Boundary Waters campaign.
Yep. It's the Boundary Waters is a special place, and we're lucky that millions of Americans have been there. And if you've been there, it just sort of becomes a part of your soul and makes you want to protect it.
So was there a favorite spot you had in the Boundary Waters, or is that way too hard to pick as well?
I don't know if I could really share that information. No, just kidding.
Top secret.
Yeah, top secret. There's so many wonderful places. There was a campsite up on Knife Lake, which is sort of in the middle of the wilderness, and it's right on the U.S.-Canadian border. And there's another 1 million acre park on the Ontario side called the Quetico Provincial Park, which is also non-motorized, and no roads or buildings or anything like that. And so there's a campsite up there near a big cliff called Thunder Point that we really came to enjoy, and we stayed on it several times throughout the year, just because it was just sort of at this crossroads that it seemed like every 3 or 4 months we would end up on Knife Lake traveling here or there, and so it sort of felt like coming home, because it was like this familiar campsite that we had camped on before. That's definitely one of my favorites, but yeah, it's hard to choose just one.
Yeah, I can imagine you saw a lot, but yeah, that part we've been at that part where that's like at the border of the US and Canada. That's a pretty cool area.
Yeah.
But yeah, you guys definitely saw a lot. I can imagine it's hard to pick just one. So you're currently living in Ely, right?
Yep.
Okay. And the main focus is now the wilderness classroom?
Yeah. So we're focused on the wilderness classroom and doing virtual school assemblies, and over the summer I'm leading some canoe trips, and Amy's helping out with our working at Ely Outfitting Company, helping with manage their outfitting, and also doing some work with the campaign. So yeah, we're staying busy.
Do you guys live civilized, or do you live in tents?
No. At the moment we're living in a house. Yeah.
Does that feel good, or do you miss all of your nights outside in tents? Because I mean, you guys said when you before you met for the first 10 years, you guys had spent more time in tents than you spent in a house.
Yeah. We've sort of gotten used to sort of going back and forth, and thankfully I'm still out quite a bit, leading canoe trips. So I still get that, but it's for 3, 4, 5, 6 days at a time. But and we sort of have a nomadic lifestyle. Oftentimes we spend part of the year living on a sailboat, but sort of with COVID that's not happening right now. So it feels good right now to be in Ely. We love Ely. This is home. So whether we're here for a few weeks or a whole year, it's always nice to be here, just because there's a lot of close friends that are here, and we just being near the Boundary Waters, whether we're just visiting it for the day or for a week at a time, or whether we're out there for a year, just being in the North Woods is a great thing. So, it's nice to have indoor plumbing and live in a house, but it's nice to have a mixture being out in the woods too.
Yeah. Definitely the amenities are much more appreciated after you're out there for so long. I can imagine.
Yeah. Even just for a few days.
Yeah, after a few days, I come back and I'm like, oh, running water and my bed and a shower. So I can't imagine how that first shower felt after a whole year, or just like that first restaurant or anything. Like, wow.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. After a long period of time, it's not something that you really crave, right? I mean, after 3 weeks in the wilderness, it seems normal. After 3 months, everything else seems abnormal, right? After a year, it's like it's just your life, right? I mean, it's just it's what's normal. So you don't crave taking a shower. I mean, maybe in the final couple hours before we exited the wilderness, we were like, oh, we'll take a shower. That'll be fun. You're so used to it, you don't feel dirty. It's just like life, So you don't miss those things.
Right. I mean, that makes sense if you're not surrounded by all the civilization and the materialistic things, that it's kind of put on the back burner. That makes sense. Winding back to the wilderness classroom, is education your background at all, or has that passion just kind of tied in with your wilderness passion?
Yeah, I don't have an education background. I was just sort of looking for a way to try and help people understand why wilderness is important, and sort of felt connected with my friend Eric Frost, and we just sort of came up with this idea and sort of ran with it. And so, I sort of consider myself an educator now because I've been doing it for a long time. But, in college, I studied anthropology and biology, and, Amy studied art and psychology. So neither of us have an education background.
Well, yeah, I mean, you just totally, tied your passions into it. And sometimes that's what people do. They just lead where the wind takes them. And it's clear that you guys have done that with all of everything that you do. It's pretty neat. Is there anything else that we haven't touched on as far as the Save the Boundary Waters campaign that people should be informed of or know?
Well, I guess just that, it's an ongoing thing, and they've filed several lawsuits recently, and there's a lot going on, and the election in November is going to be really important for our continued efforts to protect the boundary waters. And there's the Boundary Waters Action Fund actually is a offshoot of the campaign to save the boundary waters, and that has they have candidates that they have vetted that are supporting protecting the boundary waters. So encourage you to look into that and find folks that are running for offices that are going to be supportive of the boundary waters and support those campaigns. And when you're getting ready to vote, just consider the boundary waters as a key issue that's important, and factor that in.
Yes. Awesome. Oh, and the book that you guys wrote, I mean, we didn't really totally touch on that, but can you give like a brief description of what people could expect from the book you wrote, A Year in the Wilderness?
Sure. Yeah. So we wrote a book called A Year in the Wilderness about our journey, and it was published by Milkweed Editions, and it's a beautiful book. It has over 100 full color photos in it. So it's almost sort of the ratio of text to images is almost like a magazine or something like that. So a lot of people pick it up and they sort of flip through it and they're like, whoa, it's almost like a giant coffee table book with.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. It's like perfect for coffee tables. It's beautiful.
Yeah, but please read it because we put a lot of effort into the words too. But yeah, check it out. It's we're just really proud of it. And Milkweed just did a wonderful job. We're actually working with them on our second book, which is about the 3-year journey we did across North America. But yeah, if you're interested in learning about the boundary waters and or love going to the boundary waters and you haven't checked it out yet, take a look at A Year in the Wilderness.
And where can people find more information about that book and about you guys?
You can find the book like on Amazon, or you can get it from, any sort of your favorite local book retailer. And you can find out more about us at our website, wildernessclassroom.org.
Awesome. And are you guys still pretty active on the Freeman Explore website as well?
Well, we're not doing too much on there right now. There are links there like to our book and stuff, but we've really, now we're focusing mostly on the Wilderness Classroom just because that's where we're able to reach more kids.
Yeah, definitely. And with this coming year. Well, thank you. This has been super informative, and I'm really glad that we could get you on today.
Yeah, thanks. Well, thanks for taking the time to talk with me, and I look forward to listening to the podcast.
We've loved doing this podcasting journey. We love bringing awesome guests on. We love seeing that people are listening, and we're really, really grateful that this is hopefully inspiring other people to get outdoors.
Yeah, and as part of our mission at Hiking Through Life, we really want to help support others in continuing their journey or starting their journey into the outdoors. So as part of that, we have plans for future episodes to address some listener feedback. So if you have questions about backpacking, hiking, adventuring outdoors, let us know. Email hikingthroughlife@gmail.com and submit us your question or topic, and we'll possibly address it in a future episode.
You've been listening to the Hiking Through Life podcast. Peace, love, and hike through life.